Now we're going to move into evaluating some of your movement and alignment pieces that factor into your pelvic floor function. The first thing I want you to do if you're seated in a chair is just freeze. I just want you to take a snapshot of how you currently are in your chair. Notice, are your feet on the floor? Are your ankles crossed? Do you have one leg crossed over the other knee? How are you supporting your weight? Do you tend to have more weight on one side versus the other? Just notice what your body is doing right here, right now. And then I want you to check in with where your weight is, not just comparing right to left, but noticing, is it more towards the back of the pelvis or more towards the front of your pelvis? And I'll give you a hint. If your back is in contact with the back of the chair or your couch, chances are you're rolled back on your pelvis. You can see in this slide, the images on the left are showing a pelvis that is tucked under. And when we are sitting on a tucked pelvis, we're asking our coccyx and our sacrum to support part of our weight, to be weight bearing. You can also see how the back of the chair is angled back somewhat, which puts us in an angled back position, which is more conducive to tucking the pelvis. Now, if you are feeling like you're sitting back, and even if you aren't, I want you to really rock your pelvis forward as if you were really sticking your glutes out back behind you. And just notice what it feels like to sit more upright on your pelvis, and specifically on the bottom of your pelvis. And then go ahead and tuck back under and rock back. And notice what that feels like. And then once again, rock your pelvis forward. And what I want you to do is to make contact with the bones at the base of your pelvis. These are called your sit bones or your ischial tuberosities. And that's what I want to be the primary area of your pelvis that is weight bearing. And you can see in the skeletal image on the upper right, when we are sitting on the ischial tuberosities, the sacrum and the coccyx are not weight bearing. They are suspended between the left and right halves of our pelvis. Let's take a look about why is this relevant? Why should you care how you sit? Let's first look at some basic anatomy of the pelvis. So we've got 4 structures primarily that make up the pelvis. We have the left and right halves of the pelvis, which are known as the coxa. And then they form the pubic bone in the front, and they wrap around to the back and meet up on either side with the triangular shaped bone called the sacrum. And where they meet is called the sacroiliac joint. So you have a left and a right sacroiliac joint. And then at the bottom of the sacrum, we have your tailbone or your coccyx. So the 4 bones are the left and right coxa, the triangular shaped sacrum, and the coccyx bone or tailbone. All of these bones are anchor points for a variety of muscles that help to stabilize and support the pelvis. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the sacroiliac joint, where the coxal bones, which that portion of them are called the ilia, where those meet up with the sacrum is the sacroiliac joint. And the sacroiliac joint is not a fused joint. They kind of butt up against each other, and they're stabilized by ligaments that weave around that particular area. But there is the potential for movement at the sacroiliac joint. And that's helpful when giving birth because that creates a wider space for the baby to move through the pelvis. But it can be tricky in other situations, and we're going to take a look at that in just a minute. Here you're looking at some of the muscles that make up the pelvic floor. And what I want you to appreciate from this image is that the sacrum and the coccyx are attachment points for some of the muscles of the pelvic floor. And those muscles run forward towards the front of the pelvis, and they run sideways to the edges of the pelvis. The attachment points of a muscle have the capacity to create movement when the muscle contracts. So we saw in the previous image that the sacrum, as I mentioned, has the ability to move slightly where it meets up with the sacroiliac joint. And the movement that it tends to do is it tends to rock forward. So the tip of the triangle has the potential to move forward towards the front of the pelvis. Now think about when you are sitting with a tucked pelvis and you are weight bearing on your sacrum and your coccyx, and you're doing that hour after hour, day after day, year after year, and you know that your body adapts to the position it's in the most frequently, you can start to consider the potential for your sacrum to be in a more tucked under position because you've been weight bearing on it for so many hours and years. And because it's an attachment point for the pelvic floor muscles, it's moving that attachment point forward. So it is creating a shortened pelvic floor muscles. It's putting those muscles that attach to the sacrum and the coccyx and run forward to the front of the pelvis. When the sacrum moves forward, it's putting those muscles in a shortened position. Which means if you think back to when we were looking at that graph that showed the sweet spot between muscle length and force production, if our pelvic floor muscles are in a shortened position, their ability to generate force is compromised. So this is why it's important for you to stop weight bearing on your sacrum so that you can stop shifting the position of your sacrum and stop putting your pelvic floor muscles in a shortened position. And here you can see in this slide the sacrum. We're looking at the side view of the pelvis. So we've got the sacrum to your left and we've got the pubic bone to your right. And we've got that hammock of muscles that runs between those two attachment points. And again, when we're weight bearing on the sacrum, the bottom portion of the sacrum is going to be rocking forward towards the front of the pelvis, putting the pelvic floor muscles in a shortened position. All right, so now that you are sitting up on your ischial tuberosities, we're going to talk about how do you stand up. So this is going to be our next evaluation. I want you to get your feet, get the outside edges of your feet so that they're straight. And then I want you to widen your feet a little bit so they're a little bit wider than your pelvis. And I want your knees to be stacked directly over your ankles so that your shin makes a vertical line. Now, from this position, I want you to stand up and pay attention to how you do it. So just notice, as you stand up, how did you stand up? And specifically, did you push down with your hands on your thighs or down on the chair or the armrests or the couch cushions? Did you move your heels closer to your chair? So as you were standing up, did you change your vertical shins? And did the knees drift forward over the feet? Now, go ahead and sit back down. We're going to do this again. This time, I want you to, once again, get yourself lined up so the outside edges of the feet are straight. The width of your feet are a little bit wider than your pelvis. And your knees are stacked directly over your ankles, so once again, you have your vertical shin. And I want you, before you stand up, I want you to lose contact with your hands so that your hands aren't resting on anything. And as you stand up, I want you to maintain your vertical shin and not push down with your hands to leverage yourself up. And let your torso drift forward as you need to do this. And then go ahead and let yourself come up and out of your chair. And notice, how easy was that for you? How difficult was that for you? And were you able to keep your shins vertical? The more we allow the knees to drift forward over the feet, the more we're recruiting our quadricep muscles, the muscles in the front of the thighs, to do the bulk of the work. And what we're really testing here is how much strength do you have in your glute muscles and in your hamstring muscles, those muscles down the back of your thigh. So if this was really hard for you, and it is for most people, chances are you have a default habit of using the muscles in the front of your thigh rather than the muscles of your glutes and your hamstrings. We really, really want to be using our glutes whenever possible. And overall, we tend to move through our day in ways that bypasses the use of the glutes. Another thing I want to point out with this is a form of a squat. So you getting out of your chair in this way and you lowering yourself down in your chair with these parameters is a modified squat. And how do you develop the strength? This is one, we just evaluated for it. And now you can use this evaluation as a way to develop the strength. So you most likely get out of a chair and sit down in a chair several times a day. If you do that a little bit more mindfully, you have the ability to improve this greatly and make a shift without having to go to the gym, without requiring any additional time be added to your day. It's just shifting how you do something that you regularly do anyway so that you can reap more benefits from it. And if this was really challenging for you to do without pushing down, one way you can modify it is by sitting up a little bit more. So putting something underneath you to elevate your pelvis so that you're not sitting up from such a lower position. And then as you develop the strength, you can lower down to the seat of the chair. All right. Now that you have gotten up and out of your chair, if you've sat back down, go ahead and stand back up. And I want you, as you're standing, to look down at your feet and notice the outside edges of your feet. What position are they in? And specifically, do they tend to be turned out? And you may notice that your right foot is doing something a little bit different compared to your left foot. We very rarely are symmetrical for a variety of reasons. We don't do symmetrical activities throughout our day, so our bodies are a reflection of that. Now I want you to go ahead and line up the outside edges of your feet so that they are straight. And if you have some type of objective straight line, whether that's a line in your hardwood floor, or your tile, or going up against a wall, just so you can really objectively get that outside edge of your foot as straight as possible. You most likely are feeling incredibly knock-kneed right now. And what that lets you know is that your body has really adapted to being in a turned out position. It's adapted to moving through your life with turned out feet. And the thighs have rotated in as a result of that. When the outside edges of your feet are straight, you've put your ankle joint in the plane that is designed to move in, which is forward and back. When we walk more turned out, we're asking the ankle joint to do a little bit of a side-to-side rocking motion with every step we take. So when we have the outside edges lined up, we've got the ankle joint in the plane of motion that it works best in. We also have our knees in the plane of motion they work best in, and our hip joints as well. In this slide, you can see when we are walking with a more turned out position, we're putting the piriformis muscle, which is the muscle that you're seeing in this view. You're looking at the front of the pelvis here. So the piriformis muscle attaches to the front of the sacrum and then runs out to the side to attach to the very top of your thigh bone. And it's part of a larger group of muscles called the deep lateral rotators, the lateral rotators of the hip. And some of those contribute more directly to the pelvic floor musculature. So when we walk with a more turned out position, we're placing the piriformis muscle and the other lateral hip rotator muscles in a shortened position. And that changes their ability to function. It changes how they function. And it changes the amount of force that they're able to generate. And it changes the amount of support that they're able to give to the structures of the pelvis and to the pelvic floor. Now you may notice that your knees feel weird, or you may notice a little pull through your knees as you line up the outside edges of your feet. Please know it is perfectly acceptable to transition more gradually to a straight outside edge of the foot. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. Your body has taken years to adapt to being in a turned out position, and expecting it to go to straight outside edges of the feet overnight may be a bit much. So if you're noticing things feel a little weird in your knees, by all means, transition more gradually. And just know that you are, over time, working your way towards the goal of having the outside edges of your knee in a straight position. Now you're going to want to have your plumb line. As you get situated with that, I want to show you the landmark we're going to be working with to evaluate the pelvis. We're going to be palpating for something called the ASIS, the anterior superior iliac spine. And you'll feel that as you find the top of your pelvis. So go ahead and dig in there to find the top of your pelvis. And then I want you to follow the top of your pelvis all the way around as it wraps around to the front. And that top frontmost part of your pelvis is where the orange dots are on this image, and that is your ASIS. So you have one on the left and you have one on the right. And that's going to be our landmark for where I want you to hold the string part of your makeshift plumb line. And then you're going to allow the weighted end to fall down towards your foot. I want it suspended a little bit so we can see how it falls. So don't have it fall all the way down and be in contact with your foot. Leave it suspended. And notice, where does it fall in relation to your ankle joint? Does it fall more towards the outside of the ankle joint? Does it fall more towards the inside of the ankle joint? What we're looking for is to have your ASIS on each side in line with the center of that ankle. And you can see the image on the left is what I was referring to earlier when we were talking about the cultural impact on our movement and alignment habits. This is the more feminine stance that we tend to think of. You can start looking around as you're out and about and just notice how people tend to hold their body and stand. And one thing to keep in mind, you may not necessarily stand with your feet touching each other, but you may have a tendency to walk with your feet more narrowly placed. So you can play with, later today, imagining as you're walking that each one of your feet, each foot, has its own track that it's moving along. And those tracks are placed at the same width as your ASIS. And just notice as you walk, what's it feel like to maintain this width so that your ankle width matches your ASIS width as you walk? How different does that feel compared to how you typically walk? Another great way to check this is, depending on where you are in the world and what time of year it is, if you have snow, you can notice your footprints in the snow and notice, you can see what the outside edges of your feet are doing, and you can also notice what's the width like between your feet. You can also do that on sand if you're at the beach, or on a summer day if you're walking through water and you notice your footprints. That's another way you can pay attention to it. So it's fun to track this and just notice, what are your habits when you are not necessarily paying attention to them? What's your default? And when we stand in this way, why do we want to stand in this way? Well, there are several reasons why. The one I want to touch on this evening is we're looking to develop strength in the gluteus medius muscles. And you have one on the left and one on the right, and they are the colored muscles in this image. And these muscles are notoriously weak. It is shocking how weak they are. And they're weak because we never use them, and we don't use them because of how we stand and how we move. So if you have a tendency to walk with your feet more closely together and or stand with your feet more closely together, you are not asking your gluteus medius muscles to do much of anything. And you can see on the image on the right, that dropping down into the hip, you think of this as like when you look at how a model walks on the runway and they've got the hips going side to side, or if you've seen movies of Marilyn Monroe, she had a really nice swish to her hips as she walked. And again, it's considered a more feminine, more attractive, sexier way to walk. But what it's really representing is weakness in this lateral hip muscles. And we'll test these more specifically in just a moment. But for now, know that one of the ways you can start setting yourself up to use these muscles so that they can support your pelvis is by monitoring really, really closely the width of your stance so that the center of your ankles match the center or the width of your ASIS. And when we have strength in these muscles, it sets up the gluteus maximus muscles to be able to do their job. One of the things to be aware of, why am I harping so much on the glutes? Well, just wait. I've only just begun. The glutes attach to the sacrum, and they help stabilize the sacrum. We saw a few slides ago that when we weight bear on the sacrum, there's a tendency for the bottom portion of the sacrum to move incrementally closer towards the front of the pelvis, which changes the length of the pelvic floor muscles. When we have glutes being used regularly and on a daily, ongoing basis, they are acting to prevent that movement of the sacrum towards the front of the pelvis. So we've got a nice stabilizing effect, and we've got a way to help maintain the optimal length in the pelvic floor musculature when we use our glutes. Now we're also going to look at things that interfere with using our glutes. So it's not just a matter of, oh, I'm going to go now and do 50 leg lifts each day to make sure that I've got nice strong glutes. You want to be using your glutes throughout your day, and you want to be moving in a way that allows you to be able to use your glutes throughout your day.